Welcome in, everybody. I'm super excited. Our guest today is Trevvor Hawk, also known as the League of Militant Atheists. And he's a creator that I found on TikTok that his content caught my attention just like that. So today I wanted to have a little conversation with him and kind of just see where he came from. So let's start off with the name, the League of Militant Atheists. Do
Okay.
you mind giving me a little background on that? I know we've talked about it, but
Yeah,
just for our
well,
listeners.
I figured if I was going to do something that was eye-catching, it would be provocative to call myself a League of Militant Atheists. And if anyone was a history buff, they would recognize that from the Soviet Union. And I've only had one person that has DM'd me that recognized it to ask if I knew the gravity of choosing that name. And I was like, oh, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I recognize what
absolutely. I
it is.
do.
Yeah. I think we're at the same point the Soviet Union was at, where we're either going to have to crap or get off the pot.
We are, man. When we talk about that, as far as the Soviet Union goes, I look at the correlations between what's going on today and the things that were going on, in the 30s in Germany,
Yeah.
leading up to all of that. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you specifically was your knowledge on Christianity and religion in general. I'm a hobbyist. If I'm a hobbyist, you're a professional. The way you break down the scripture and are able to glean the the things that are just bullshit that are coming out of it as opposed to the things that are that contradict one another. That was amazing to me. I think one of the first things I saw was you tabbing a Bible,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the amount of time that it takes to tab a Bible like that is
I've got the
incredible.
time down. I can actually tab a whole Bible cover to cover in probably 12 minutes.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
impressive, man. That is impressive.
If
So
I don't care about my handwriting, if I just fly through it,
right, right. I got you. I got you. Now, what do you do with those Bibles after you've tabbed them? Do you give
I give,
those to people?
yeah, I give them away. I get messages all the time from people who are really thanking me, which is so strange because I thought I was going to start this content journey to try to disenfranchise Christianity. I
Right.
wanted Christianity absolutely relegated to the sidelines of public discourse. And so I thought of different ways to do that because for many years I tried to prove Christianity true, which is why I know it so intimately because a lot of people had reasons why it wasn't true and I had to prove those people wrong. But there are creators like Dan McClellan
Right.
who I've based my bio off of because he says he's here to increase the public's access to the academic study of the Bible and religion. I'm just here to increase the public's rejection of the
Right.
Bible and religion. And
Right.
so there are times where and Dan McClellan has stitched one of my videos, as far as I know. It might be more than one, but he stitched one, but I don't care. We're all
Right.
rowing in the same direction.
We are.
I'm not here to cross streams with someone like Dan McClellan. If we're both chopping the same tree, eventually it will fall. We don't have to chop in the
Absolutely.
same place.
That's right. No, that's true. I to go back to, we were talking about the Soviet Union, Germany, and all the things leading up. I did in one of my podcasts a deep dive into white Christian nationalism. And in researching that, I discovered there's a lot of legs to it. It's something that's
Yeah.
been prevalent in our nation essentially since the beginning, but this is not a Christian nation. It was never founded as a Christian nation. But you go look at the Heritage Foundation, and where did they come from? The Seven Mountain Mandate, all the
Yeah.
way back to the Powell Manifesto. And what are your thoughts as far as Christian nationalism in America today? Like, how do we handle that?
Well, I'm not sure how it'll be different because when I served, it was when I was in the army. There
Mhm.
was this dichotomy. There was this comparison between the white West and the brown Muslim
Muslim.
East. So, and I believed that obviously until I got to Afghanistan and spent considerable time in the Middle East and the Near East. I bought into that too. I thought that being an American Christian made me somehow superior to those people,
Yeah.
and that they were simply motivated by religious zealotry to attack us Americans. And when I got to Afghanistan, nobody had ever heard of Osama bin Laden. They'd never even heard the name. They had no clue why we were there. And so, it took a lot of perspective shifting for me. But today, our primary adversary seems to be this narco terrorism South American target.
Hmm.
And they're overwhelmingly Christian. And
Absolutely.
so I don't know if they're going to have the same kind of success that the Bush administration had with targeting similar Christians.
Right.
So, but today, I mean, and you brought up the 30s, the first treaty signed by the Nazis was with the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And so they saw the value of religion.
Hmm.
You know, you don't even have to believe it. You just have to recognize its utility. And
Oh,
that's highlighted in the new South Park episode if you haven't seen it.
I haven't seen that one. I am an episode behind. That's our guilty pleasure.
Oh,
So
mine too, yeah.
yeah.
But and so I think we're in a dangerous place because of the shift Christianity has gone throughout history has
Hmm.
placed us in a very dangerous position because it used to be that Christianity was universal. It was Catholicos. It was for
Right.
everybody. And that universal church proved to be not very universal once the printing press was invented and anyone could read the Bible.
Yes.
And they found out the word pope isn't in it.
Right. Yeah. Funny how that is. Yeah.
And so Christianity shifted, but it's shifted several times, of course.
It
And now
has.
we're shifted into this strange zone of like delusional self worship and it almost being a mark of pride that they don't know anything about the Bible and they don't know anything about ecclesiastical history because then their faith is more substantial or something.
I think, and I've rationalized it like this. I think the common person that considers themselves a Christian, may go to church on Easter Sunday, may go to some sort of Christmas service, worship service or something like that. And they haven't studied the Bible. They haven't read the Bible. They don't know what the Beatitudes are. They don't know certain things that are in the Bible, and they can't separate the things that aren't in the Bible from the things that are in the Bible.
Yeah.
And but they know is when I say Christian nationalism and I attack it, I'm attacking Christianity. And I'm not. I'm not. I'm kind of with you in that regard. I think religion, all religions, is a bane on humanity in and of itself, the ability to control people. However, just like you, I took an oath to that Constitution, and in that Constitution, people have the freedom of religion.
Mhm.
And so, I support Christians and their right to do it, but I don't support Christian nationalism, trying to um, put the Ten Commandments in every classroom.
Well,
So that's
in a similar light, I would never advocate for violence upon any flat earther. I would never say something like, "Well, that person thinks Prince is the greatest musical artist to ever live, and it's obviously Elvis, so we should go commit violence on that person."
right,
I don't think that.
right,
But I think there should be a robust discussion about what's actually true, and then we should try to follow that. And my own ritualized self care, whatever that looks like, that has no part of my content creation because I have to just delegitimize Christianity, and nothing I do will affect the nun that is right now serving the sick somewhere in Colombia.
right.
Right.
Yeah,
So the only person I'm going to affect are the poisoned ones, the ones that need to
right,
be inoculated.
right. No, I do agree with you on that. I really do. There is an issue that comes with cognitive dissonance when you start speaking about religion and you start, it's such a personal thing to so many people. However, it's almost like they never stopped and looked and said, how fortunate are you to have been born in the exact right time under the exact right religion?
Yeah.
Because you don't see people in Budapest just all of a sudden being born in the faith of their family, just saying, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and turn to Jesus. I just heard of this Jesus fella. I think I'm going to turn to him. Their
Yeah.
conversion rates aren't that great.
No, and when you look at a map of the religious breakdown across the globe, you'll see that it has nothing to do with what's true. It has to do
Hmm.
with what's socially acceptable where you were born.
Yes.
If there was a religion, because in India, there are, I think they're called the Agori, they ritualize funerals. They do all sorts of rituals around the deceased and stuff like that, which, of course, in Judaism is a cardinal sin. right? You can't
Absolutely.
touch a dead body at all. And almost, I think the bulk of their religious worship is circling around dead bodies in some fashion. And so that, I think, is what is so problematic about it, is that if it were the truth, it would manifest differently or it would be oriented differently, but you could reduce it to the exact same point, and there we would find God, or we would find something supernatural, right?
Right.
But as I was writing this morning, I was writing that I think religiosity is simply an error in human cognitions.
No, I agree. I absolutely agree. And in that same token that you were talking about, it should boil down to one singularity. That's what I call it. A vast majority of religions will boil down to one singularity, and most of them end up being some type of a selfless service to others. You
Yeah.
know, if you took the words of Christ, that's basically what he's saying. It's selfless service to others. However, you don't need a God to understand that. You don't need
Yeah.
a deity to be able to understand that we're only here for a short time, you know. I wanted to ask you about the Abrahamic faiths. And one, we both agree that Abraham was not a true person. That was not an actual person. Do you mind expounding on that a little bit?
Sure. So Ibrahim, so in ancient Hebrew, for
Mm-hmm.
the audience, it doesn't have vowels.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Hebrew only has consonants, and they didn't utilize spaces for a long time. So it was just one run on sentence with just
Right.
capital letters. So most of the reconstructions of Paleo Hebrew and ancient Hebrew, biblical Hebrew and stuff are educated guesses.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Abraham's actual name is just the consonants. So if you take out the I's, take out the A's, that's why he shows up as Ibrahim, Abraham, because you can
Mm-hmm.
pick any vowel at
Right.
all.
No,
He,
you're
so
fine.
Abraham, so his name is simply the consonants, and
Mm-hmm.
his legend shows up right at the same time the Proto-Indo-Europeans came down from the Indus River Valley, and they had a dedicated priesthood called the Brahmin with the
Yes.
exact same letters
Yes.
because there's no vowels. And so you have the Brahmin who come down, and the Brahmin, his significant other, the female counter half, was Saraswati.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got Abraham and his wife Sarai,
Right.
and I'm not supposed to think that's connected to Brahmin and Saraswati, you
Yes.
know? And
Absolutely.
and they call the Sumerians the black-haired people. And so that's like calling somebody the three-eyed people. You know, like
Right.
you would only do that if you didn't have two eyes, or you
Right.
didn't have three eyes. So calling them the black-haired people would suggest they didn't have black hair.
Right.
And if you look at the rivers and how the river waterways connect and eventually lead down through the Near East and the Indus River Valley and stuff like that, it's pretty clear. Oh, and how the languages change all the way through Turkey. And it really looks like a group of Proto-Indo-Europeans who had a dedicated priesthood somewhere around Brahmin and Saraswati came and made contact with the Mesopotamian cultures at the exact time Abraham would have settled in Hebron or
Right.
Haran.
Iran.
Yeah. And those mountains and the earliest parts of the Bible all talk about fire,
Mm-hmm.
lava,
Yes.
earthquakes, and mountains.
Yes.
And the Brahmin had dedicated worship that was all about fire sacrifices. And there's just a whole lot of coincidence. So, are you
Absolutely.
are you familiar with Richard Carrier, Dr.
Yes.
Richard Carrier?
Yes.
I don't know how familiar your audience is with him, but I think he's fantastic. And he basically uses Bayes' theorem of reasoning, where he asked the question, what would the evidence look like if that were true? And so, what would the evidence look like if God picked one mating pair to create every single descendant of the Israelites out of their genetic code? What would the evidence look like? Well, we'd be able to find that easily with a
Right.
DNA test. And DNA tests have come back that no single mating pair is
Right.
responsible for the genetic diversity that we see in the Mediterranean. And so what would the evidence look like if that were true? Well, I think the evidence, if Abraham and Sarai are based
Mm-hmm.
off of the Brahmin and the Saraswati, then that's the evidence we actually see,
Right. It
opposed to
is.
what's in the Bible.
It's funny how those legends come up, though. You can look all throughout history and you can trace these things back. You know, it's like the Ten Commandments. Well, the first five Ten Commandments seem to deal with very human virtues, like jealousy, predominantly jealousy. And then the
Yeah,
last five seem to come from Hammurabi's code, you
they
know?
do.
And Hammurabi's code predated Judaism at that point, probably what, 2,500 years, something like that. Might have been less than that,
Yeah,
1,200
probably
years.
like
I think it was
800 years to
800,
be.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
So,
it
plenty.
plenty, yes,
Plenty.
quite a few, yes, absolutely. And then, and you also brought up the fact that they worship the mountains and the fire and things like that in the Old Testament, which also goes back into the Canaanite pantheon. You know, they
Oh, yeah.
had in the Canaanite pantheon, they had, you know, the god of fire, the god of, you know, volcanoes and things like that, which is where Adonai comes from, you know.
Yeah.
He is a descendant from the pantheon of El, you know.
Yeah, and he his name could also be tied to the Hittite word for lava.
Yes,
So,
absolutely. He was a and I've read different things. It's hard to find, it's been hard for me to find a solid base on the Canaanite pantheon just because it does date back so far. There's
yeah.
not as much information on that. But I mean, I remember as a kid singing hymns in church saying we're going to back to Canaan land. And I'm
hmm
like, why is that so implemental in Christianity? Why is that such a Christian thought, a comprehension for the Canaan return?
I think it's because of Saint Augustine.
Yeah.
But and one thing I've tried to tell my children, because they play, one of my kids is a competitive soccer player, and there's a lot of Mormons on his team. And there was do you know the new 7 Up, the Shirley Temple 7 Up?
No, I don't
Well, they
think I
got
do.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a pomegranate and red grenadine flavored 7 Up.
Okay.
And that was one of the options for the kids for some reason. And my son asked his teammate, "Hey, do you want that one?" And he goes, "No, that one's disrespectful to God." And my son was like, "How?" And the kid goes, "Well, it says temple."
Oh, dear goodness.
And so my son asked me after the game, he was like, "Is that disrespectful to their God?" And I was like, "Well, in English, it's the word temple, but it's not
Yeah.
that word anywhere in the original Bible." So anyone who originally wrote the Bible, they wouldn't have even recognized the word temple or any of the letters we
No.
use to write it. So no, the kid's fine.
Yeah. It's good. It's good. I think people get caught up too much in the details too. You know,
Yeah.
my wife is going through a deconstruction of her Christianity. When we got together, she was a buddy of mine. He sent me a message. He was like, "Hey, man, I see you're talking to Rachel, and I just wanted to warn you. There's a lot of Jesus on her Instagram. You know, she was one of those daily verse, you know, posters and things like that. And she's been going through a deconstruction. And she'll ask me questions sometimes. And in the beginning, I was like, do you want me to ruin your religion for you, or do you, you know?" And because I feel like when you start talking about religion to people, it's such a personal thing and it's so deeply indoctrinated and ingrained into them that it's like being that kid that tells all the other kids that Santa isn't real. You know, you get that douchebag kind of label. And
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I was at the No Kings rally that
okay.
was here in Boise not long ago. My there were these street evangelists going around the crowd trying
Oh,
to
God.
spread the gospel. And so I struck a conversation with them, and the guy, I was like, "Look, I do this two different ways. If you're strong in the faith, I'll handle you a different way. But
Yeah.
if you're a new Christian or you feel shaky in the faith, I'll handle you a different way."
Right.
And he goes, "Well, I'm strong in the faith."
What did
And
you
I
say?
was like,
What did you put out there? I got to know.
"Well," I said, "is the Bible true?" And he said, "Absolutely." I said, 100%. He said, "Yes, sir, 100%. I said, "Even Second Thessalonians?" He said, "Yes, even Second Thessalonians." And I said, "The only reason you're convinced is because God sent you a powerful delusion. So you would believe lies.
Yes.
Let's read it."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Well, there you go." And then in Isaiah, it says, or no, is it Ezekiel 13, perhaps, where it says that Satan takes on the glorious vestments of an angel. And so I was like, how certain you are proves to me that that is a delusion sent by God,
Yes.
because there's no other power that would make somebody so committed than a God deluding them. And you probably aren't strong enough to see through it.
You replied to a comment on a video I saw this morning, I think it was, where he was talking about narrow is the way.
Yeah. Yeah. I tell him, I said, hey, if the Bible's true, which that's not my position,
No.
but if that's your position and the Bible's true, it says that the path is narrow, the correct path, it insinuates. The correct
Yes.
path is narrow and that very few will find it. But there's 4 billion Christians.
Yeah.
That's not my definition of very few.
It's a pretty wide river, if you
It's
ask
quite a
me.
lot.
Yeah, it
And there's
is.
more churches in the United States than there are gas stations.
Yeah, I say this all the time when people tell me that, because in my live streams I get a lot of people come in that think I'm attacking Christianity, and of course that is the narrative that they want to perpetuate, is that Christianity is under attack. In other nations, Christians may be persecuted, they may be getting killed, and they actually are in some areas. However, it's not the case in Arkansas. I can't
Yeah.
throw a rock without hitting a church. And I'm not
Oh, yeah.
talking about any type of diverse worship center. I'm talking about straight up Baptist,
Yeah.
missionary Baptist,
The
holiness,
occasional
Assembly
Episcopal
of God.
church.
Occasional, yes, because they're prominent, and it's, there's a few different flavors, but they're all basically the same. And so Christianity is not under attack. If anything, I would say that in our country right now, Christian nationalism is attacking the rest of the nation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's there. There's a Seven Mountains mandate flying in front of the Department of Education.
Yes. Well, and there's no coincidence in that as well, because the author, one of the co-authors of the Heritage Foundation, is the undersecretary to Linda McMahon. Just
Yeah,
like,
the wrestling lady.
yes, the wrestling lady who, and then you also have the head of the FCC, Brendan Carr, who
Yeah,
wrote a big
yeah,
chunk
he's
of
another one.
communications on in
Yeah,
the Project 2025. And if you go in and deconstruct the authors of Project 2025 and the members of this regime, I mean, yeah, this cabinet,
this Reich.
yes,
Yeah,
this Reich, they're they're all through there. They're all
yeah,
through there. I mean, Mike Johnson even has, what is that? Oh, what was the name of American the church that he's so fondly proud of? The Apostolistic. I can't remember right off the top of my head. He has their flag on his desk. He has
yeah.
his, and
Yeah,
it is
the
yes,
yeah,
yes. And so, I mean, that's a scary thing when you think about it,
yeah.
getting into there. And that's probably one of my big rants right now is I hate the bombings of the boats off of Venezuela. I think that's abhorrent. I think at some point there's going to be some, dire consequences for the people that perform those actions.
I hope so.
I hope so. I hope so. Because if that goes by unscathed, we're cooked. I
Well,
mean,
can I tell
that's
you, when I was in Afghanistan in 2009,
hmm
General Petraeus
hmm
expected of me courageous restraint.
yes,
General Petraeus came and spoke to us and told us, I expect from you courageous restraint. Your life could be in serious danger, but if an innocent person could die as a result of your actions, you must show restraint. And if
yes,
that means you sacrifice your life to ensure that an unarmed civilian doesn't die, that's the definition of service.
yes,
And if I could be asked to show courageous restraint against the Taliban, then I damn sure can expect that from police officers in my own country.
absolutely.
And I damn sure can expect that expect that from my Department of Defense.
You would hope so. I
If
mean,
you can't
that's
show courageous restraint, if you can ask an individual to show it, but you can't show it as an administration,
yeah.
you have
No,
no
I
credibility.
you have zero credibility, and also the fact that we've got a frat boy up there running the Department of Defense.
Mhm.
And look, nothing against people with addictions or anything like that. However, I had a security clearance when I was in the military. When I was in the Army, I worked on some weapon guidance systems and things like that. I knew going in when they were doing my background check, if I hadn't have been upfront and honest, there were things that probably could have hurt my chances of getting that security clearance. That was just a secret security clearance. And no telling how much money was actually spent by the federal government to get that clearance pushed through. Can you imagine the amount of security clearance that has to be pushed through for somebody who is going to be the head
The
of the
second,
department? Yeah, the Secretary of the Department of Defense.
well, zero, because if you actually did it, he would have been disqualified.
Absolutely.
And so it's clear they just omitted anything that would have been disqualifying. But the guy was a major in the National Guard. So his experience is up to battle staff operations, like S3 operations, is
Yes.
the limit of Hegseth's expertise. And doing stuff like joint firepower, doing stuff like battle staff, is learning to implement the full spectrum warfare. It is not something that you can just quickly learn because every battlefield is different.
That's why they
And
have
so,
War College, you
yeah,
know?
and that's why experience is so valuable and why it's so required and why they always pair a guy that's got 20 years experience with a guy who just came out of 8 years of a university. And they go, now
Yes.
you guys figure out the right answer together.
Yes.
Now he doesn't have either. He's got no experience and no education. And now he's running the whole thing.
Yes. That's why
And
typically you've got generals and admirals that take that position
yeah,
because they do have that experience. They do have that know-how. They do have that knowledge. What are your thoughts about his tongue lashing of the generals and the upper level officers when he
well,
called that meeting?
yeah, I think it was totally predictable, totally foreseeable. They are trying to revamp the laws of land warfare from the inside out, from the trigger puller out, instead of
Yes.
from the doctrinal authority down.
Down.
And it's because the doctrinal authority won't make the change because it's nonsense. And there was a quote that I heard years ago from Saddam Hussein where he said, if the people allowed it to happen, then it is what was right.
That's incredible. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. I had never heard that quote before. I love quotes. Quotes are like my thing. But yes, if the
Yeah, and
people
so
allow it to.
I just think it was totally foreseeable, and a lot of the political commentators got it right when they said he's going to pull everybody in and do a big loyalty speech
Yeah. And
because yeah,
the silence was deafening.
oh, yeah,
It definitely was. I was honestly proud. I have a lot of people that'll tell me that the vast majority of our military are, Trump supporters. And to that I say it maybe on your E1 to E4, maybe E5 level,
yeah,
maybe through your O1 to O3. But once you get up into those higher rankings, I think those people tend to be, they
more
probably tend,
judicial.
yes,
Yeah,
these are guys that also deal with bullshit day in and day out and are able to discern the difference between fact and fiction. Whereas when you have a guy that's coming in that's a PFC, he's rah rah, let's do this. That's why you have it's like one of my drill sergeants in basic training said, most of your Medal of Honor recipients are privates because privates are stupid and they'll jump on a grenade. And he's,
yeah,
whereas that first sergeant's tossing a kid on the grenade. The older I've gotten, I see that more. Your kids come in, they want to be heroic. They want to go off and win the war for freedom. Bringing into that point, at what point while you were in service, if there was a point, did you realize that we were fighting a fighting?
I was at JRTC at Fort Polk, Louisiana,
Mm-hmm.
and I saw a man walking with a bag from the PX. He had just bought some snacks, and it was the same man that I had detained in combat 2 years prior.
My goodness.
I had this fellow was walking down the road in Afghanistan once upon a time, and he had a briefcase. And I thought that is remarkable because no one in Afghanistan has a briefcase. And so I asked him, I was like, hey, what's in the briefcase? And he didn't speak English. And so, I
Yeah, he did.
got a little forceful with him
Yeah.
and told him, you're going to have to open that damn briefcase. And inside of it was two textbooks. One was on circuitry and wiring, and one was on chemistry,
Mm-hmm.
like volatile chemistry.
Right.
And I was like, well, buddy, you're going to jail.
Yeah.
I feel bad for you, but,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
glad it went down this way because it could have gone worse.
Right.
And so, detained him, took him back to the cop, called S2. They brought in a Black Hawk, picked him up, flew him away. And I thought, wow, I just took down another vile terrorist for Uncle Sam. 2 years later, that man is working as an interpreter for Fort Polk, Louisiana. And I walked up to him and I said, do you remember me? And he said, of course. And I said, I thought you didn't speak English. And he goes, well, I do. And now I'm an interpreter. And I thought, I just can't believe it. I was like, yeah, but I thought you were obviously an IED guy,
hmm
And he goes, well, I was, but now I'm a translator. And I was like, so there really was no point?
I mean,
But
what did
that's what
we
it was.
so I was in basic training when September 11th happened.
Ooh, good.
Yeah, yeah, it got tighter than the hair in a biscuit. I mean, it
Oh, I
was.
bet.
So I'm down there in Fort Benning, and we're you're all rah rah and everything at that point. Your adrenaline's up. You know how it is. There's
Oh,
a
yeah.
certain amount of brainwashing that goes into being militarized. To be able to, the government's really good at being able to show you where that switch is. They just have a hard time telling you how to turn it off. At
Yeah.
some point. So anyway, we're excited. We're going to go to Afghanistan and we're going to find bin Laden. And I mean, look, it was a national fever at that point. And
Mhm. Yeah, I caught on. I caught the fever.
yeah, patriotism was super high, and we felt like we were fighting a good fight, a noble fight.
Yeah.
And my first orders came down, or when our first deployment orders came down. I was at Fort Campbell at that time, Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And my first orders were for Afghanistan, and we were excited, absolutely stoked. We were like, heck yeah, there we go, we're going. And then about a week and a half later, our orders changed. We're going to Iraq. And I was like, Iraq? We were all looking at each other like, why? That's
How can
not
that
where
be?
we're the dude that did all this. You remember the towers guys? Those guys? Those guys are all over there. They're like, no,
Yeah.
no, they're in Iraq. And I was like, man, this is some bullshit.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that was my moment there, was when orders all of a sudden changed to Iraq. And then of course by that point in time I was out of training and everything, and I'm able to watch the news, and I'm seeing on the news this shift from Afghanistan to Iraq, and I was like, that sounds fishy.
Yeah, oh yeah. And it is, and of course it was, and everything that came out years after the fact was like, well, those reports weren't really as accurate as we led everyone to believe they were. But anyway, yeah, so when I realized it was all kind of bullshit was when it was like I was congratulated for bringing in a high value IED terrorist. And then I sat and shared some ramen with him in
Right.
Louisiana.
Oh man.
Is It was the damnedest thing.
Yeah. It's funny how
And
those things work out. And then every time they've had a duly elected leader that we didn't want or like, what did we do? We overthrew them. And then that led to the Ayatollah, which led to now you've got an authoritarian theocracy over there.
yeah.
And I mean, what do you expect is going to happen? We literally paid Iran to bomb the shit out of Iran in the 80s.
Oh yeah.
We put Saddam Hussein in power solely for that purpose.
Yeah.
You think they hate us because of our freedoms? They hate us because we won't keep the fuck out of their country and stop meddling in their shit.
Well, and I was talking, a buddy of mine was from Great Britain, and he was telling me after the service, of course,
Mm-hmm.
and in a similar fashion, he said something to the effect of this big immigration crisis that they're facing in the UK. He's like, I just can't understand how there's tens of thousands of Muslim migrants coming from the Middle East. I was like, you can't understand that? You can't understand why millions of people would have been displaced from the Middle East? There's nothing in your memory bank that can take you back that would make you think maybe there was a large part of the Middle East that had been destroyed. Who did that?
Yeah. Well, and this goes back into the Christian nationalism thing, but Renald Camus wrote a book called The Great Replacement in 2011. It's an uptake on the Great Replacement theory from back in the early 1900s, back in a time when eugenics was really in full swing and everything.
Yeah.
But he modernized that Great Replacement theory by saying that basically is Islamic people of color are trying to take away European Christian men's place of power. They're trying to overthrow their place of power.
Have you ever seen the Disney movie Blank Check?
Yeah, like years ago. Years ago.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a line from that movie where the guy goes, have you ever tried to kill two birds with one stone? He's like, it's impossible unless they're little bitty birds and it's a great big stone. And so I've taken that and applied it to this Christian nationalism thing. Because in the argument with, whether there's a Christian worldview or a Muslim worldview, I just take the big old rock of there was no Abraham. Boom. I want to
Boom.
smash both you little birds. Like, that's enough out of both you yappers.
Well, and the thing, what kills me also about the Abrahamic religions are the fact that they've killed the divine feminine. There is no divine feminine. And he's like, hey, I got a book for this.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's see. When God Was a Woman
Oh, wait, who wrote that? Hold on, I'm writing that down. When God Was a Woman.
by Merlin Stone. But that is a fantastic book on the divine feminine. Also, this one. This one's quite a bit older, but The Golden Bough.
Yes, The Golden Bough. Yes. Now, I have read excerpts from that. Right. So, interesting question. Now that we're kind of swinging back around to the religious aspect of it, was there a specific book that you read that really, I know we've talked about your deconstruction, you really didn't have was there a specific book that really just turned the page for you where you were like,
Well, I read a bunch of pro-Christian books to
right,
attempt to see if I was right.
right,
And I read Making Sense of God, and one of the chapters is it logical to believe in God? Is it logical to believe that Jesus cleansed us of some evil force that we can't see or measure in any way? And the book made the point that yes, it is logical to believe that. But I was unconvinced. But my whole thing, it was like this paradox where I went back and forth. So my deconstructions, it was, I thought Christianity was true. I was going to prove I was a real man and a real warrior, and I was going to go join the army and go fight the heathens in the Middle East and prove my manhood. And I went there and I found out there are no heathens. There's just regular people,
it's just men. Yeah.
just regular old people.
Yeah.
Most of them don't care at all.
Mm-hmm.
They got no stake in the game other than what we brought. There's several different ways that I could explain it, but I had been hunting in my youth, like, most outdoorsy folks. And I always felt a high level of sympathy for the animals that were being harvested, where I thought, man, that's unfortunate, because if I had a knife, then you would have had a fighting chance. But in a tree stand, you got no shot.
30 yards
Yeah.
away, you just walk broadsided in front of me.
And so I get it, because the predator has to eat, and if you don't eat, you die. And I'm not the one that made the design where we have to chomp up other organisms and turn them into poop.
Right.
I didn't make that design,
Right.
but that's the design we're in. And so I felt a high level of sympathy for these animals because I thought it sure would be a lot more fair if they had a fighting chance. But my parents made me feel better about it by saying animals can't suffer. They don't have a soul like humans do.
Right.
And humans are special. So animals die in a different way than humans die. And I got to Afghanistan and found out that was a lie.
It is a lie. Yeah, absolutely it is.
And the exact same amount of fear, the exact same amount of just panic that an animal dies with is what a human dies with. And there wasn't anything special or supernatural or pretty about it, And I thought, really hoped we were different, but it's looking like we're not.
We're not.
And so that's kind of what kickstarted it, because if I hadn't have had that experience with death, I'm not sure I would have been so shaken out of my beliefs.
When you broke free of the indoctrination, we'll just say that, when you broke free of those manacles and everything, what was the response from your family? Were they disappointed? Did they treat you differently?
Yeah. Yeah. One of my cousins, I remember I had mentioned it to my father in passing, and he didn't say anything about it. He just kind of was like, but then my cousin asked me to come to Montana and help him build a wood shop, or a big metal shop up there, like a big 10-foot ceiling, big shop. And so I went up there to Montana to help my cousins build this thing, and I got ambushed. They were all like, so what do you mean you're not Christian?
Yeah.
And I was like, what is this? I'm looking, my cousins and my uncles are all like surrounding me, like answer
Yeah.
for yourself. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not convinced anything supernatural exists. If something supernatural exists, you got to convince me it's your supernatural thing. Three, if your supernatural thing is real, you have to convince me it's worth worshiping. And four, you have to convince me worship is something anyone should do for any reason ever. If you can convince me of those four things, then we can talk.
Right.
But I knew the Bible so intimately, I was like, you probably don't want to do that.
One of my wife's girlfriends, her husband was like, and I've been open about my atheism, as open as anybody could be about their Christianity. I'm not ashamed of it. You can argue with me, but all your argument only falls back to the Bible. You
Yeah.
have no other claims. And if I can disprove anything in the Bible, look, let's follow the timeline from the Edict of Milan to the Council of Nicaea and figure out where those, the fight between the Gnostics and the Arians, and see who came out on top. Why is it that you believe that these books, going into the apocryphal text and all that, let's see why those books didn't belong in there. Have you read any of those? But I felt that my, grandfather was a pastor and a preacher in a holiness church. And I don't know if you know what a holiness church is, but
Pentecostal?
it is Pentecostal on methamphetamine.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So that's where you've got the real pew jumpers coming in. There's a sect of the holiness that will actually take up serpents um, in their,
They took
during
Mark
their services.
16:18. They took Mark 16:18 dead serious.
Dead serious, dead serious.
And good for them.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to prove this is real. A lot of folks weren't as strong in the faith as they thought.
That you get snake bit and you might change your mind.
Yeah, absolutely. But when I first came out, and I say that, I didn't do it voluntarily. I knew what my parents were older. I was 26, 27 probably when I had my big conversion. My dad used to sit and ask me, he was a deacon and, he taught Sunday school, and he would go over his Sunday school lesson with me and ask me questions. He had the Greek concordance here and he was studying this and that. And then they found a copy of Bertrand Russell's Why I'm Not a Christian.
Yeah, I got it right up there.
Yeah, it's a great book, man. To be written in what, 1908 or something? No, 1920 something, I
It's the
think.
damn thing.
Yeah,
Jesus.
Why I'm Not a Christian. Yeah, it's sitting right up there. I'm looking at it right there. They found a copy of that I had, and I was just down visiting, and they were like, "What is this?" And I was like, "Oh, well, I'm kind of going through some stuff here," and they couldn't understand. They're like, "What do you mean? We've taught you in the way you should go." And I said, "That's called indoctrination. That just means that you were indoctrinated with the same stuff."
Well, and my deconstruction, I just realized this. My deconstruction started because of a Mormon apostle, a man named Reuben Clark. He said, "The truth cannot be harmed by investigation."
Yeah.
And if you have the truth, great. It can't be harmed.
That's right.
If you don't have the truth, it ought to be harmed.
Yes.
And I thought, that is such a bold claim to make. So I was impressed by that. I thought, if anybody can say that about their faith, they're standing all 10 toes.
Right.
And
But there's not.
so I need to find out if this guy's telling the truth. And I read the CES letter by Jeremy Runnels, and I emailed Jeremy Runnels.
Wow.
Because I wanted to ask him questions, and he emailed me
Yeah.
back, and I've got our correspondence exchange saved in one of my documents. And it was a great exchange, and I realized the Book of Mormon and Pearl of Great Price and Doctrine of Covenants are a complete hoax, total hoax.
100%.
And so, okay, well, that's predicated on Christianity being true. So now I've got to go back one order of magnitude, and I got to see if Christianity was true.
Yes.
But you have a bunch of Protestants saying that Catholics aren't real Christians, but Catholics were much older. And
You wouldn't
so I thought,
have Protestants without Catholics.
it wouldn't happen.
You wouldn't. Yeah.
And so, I looked at the writings of John Calvin, the writings of Martin Luther, and it became pretty obvious that the military commander Constantine just kept living on through all the Wilhelms and all of the Pope Sylvesters. And it's just the same egomaniacal personality that just keeps finding his way into that pontifical or empire role.
Yes.
And the word Tsar is Caesar.
Yes.
And so, I mean, even through the Soviet Union's collapse, we're still dealing with this Caesar
Absolutely.
mentality.
Yes.
And it wouldn't have been the case without Christianity. Paula
No,
Fredrickson
it
has
wouldn't
a
be.
great book. What is it called? It's Christianity in the First 400 Years or something like that. And it's an excellent book, but I can't remember. Well, what else were we talking about? What was the other?
Well, we were just talking about different books that have influenced our thinking
Oh,
and ways of
oh yeah.
thought,
So I was trying to prove Christianity true,
Hmm.
and a Mormon apostle convinced me to scrutinize it as hard as possible.
It's a mistake. You can't do that.
Eh,
I'm
Yeah,
sorry. That's not going to make your religion flourish when you do that. There's too many holes
no.
in the story.
And then I found Dan McClellan, and
Yes.
his book is Adonai's Divine Images, and it's an
Yes.
extrapolation on his college thesis. And so I bought, or his doctoral thesis, and I
Doctoral
I got
thesis.
I picked that up, read it, and then went through his sources, and I picked up Emmanuel Tov's A Textual Criticism of the Hebrew Bible.
Yes.
And then I started learning biblical Hebrew so I could read it. And yeah.
I never went that far. I never went that far. I have read the imagery, talking about the symbolism and the imagery and all that, There's some really good literature out there. You have to be careful, though. There's a lot of woo woo shit out
Oh,
there,
yeah.
too. I mean, I've accidentally stumbled across some of that, and I'm like, wait, no, sorry.
Yeah.
There is a lot of woo woo stuff out there, but
Well, in my Greek beginning Greek primer right here, it tells you that if you have trouble studying, just pray. Just pray. That's all you got to
yes.
do.
Or,
Because Jesus wants you to know Greek. And so if you ask Jesus, bada boom.
well, how did Jesus come through with you on that?
So far it's all Greek to me.
So, right, I
So
hear you.
no, I do all right. I know the alphabet and stuff, and I can recognize the major words as they come across, but
Right.
so I wouldn't be able to quickly translate anything, especially from an old manuscript where I had to differentiate between the words that are just capital letters. But yeah, so Adonai's Divine Images, Emmanuel Tov's A Textual Criticism of the Hebrew Bible, Theodore Lewis, The Origin and Character of God. It's a fantastic book, but it's not for a layman. You
Right.
actually have to have a pretty good base, or it's just going to go right over your head. And Dr. Josh Bowen has a 2-volume set called The Atheist Guide to the Old Testament, and that's heavy into the archaeology of the conquest narrative and the Exodus narrative. So, basically, geoscience, astrophysics, and DNA have disproven Genesis.
Right.
And all of its copies it borrows the Amenemopi and the Hammurabi and all the other
Yeah.
stories that it borrows.
I just also have to throw this out there, though. You brought up the destruction of Genesis, basically. I saw a video on the Book of Faces. I hate to even say that name out loud because it's just a quagmire of misinformation out there. But anyway, I saw a video out there and this guy was like, how could you tell if someone was a man or a woman if the skeletal remains were only 500 years old? And the top comment on that video was, can you guess? Count the ribs.
See, it's so stupid I didn't even think of it.
It's so stupid. I
Yeah.
lost my mind. I lost my ever loving mind. My wife was like, what's the matter with you? I said, some dumb fuck said, count the ribs. Count the ribs.
Ridiculous.
We're in
Absolutely. But
2025 and people still
yeah,
believe that men and women have a different amount of ribs.
yeah, yeah. But I mean, I'd be lying if I said I didn't believe that too when I was little.
Oh yeah,
You
when I
know,
was little, yeah.
I had heard that and I thought it was true.
I also believed that God sent a she bear out to destroy a bunch of children for calling a guy Baldy. You
Yeah,
know, I also believe that. I believe that Jonah, lived in the belly of a great fish for 3 days.
yeah, yeah.
And if you call it a whale, they're going to correct you and say, no, this was not a mammal. This was a great fish.
That's right. Well, and it's funny that you bring up mammal and like stuff with. I've had people say on my TikToks a lot. I get comments that are like, "Well, how do you know DNA is the truth? How do you know DNA is right?" And I
Yeah.
was like, "Have you ever done a 23andMe? And did it come back 99% British? And did you think it was telling the truth?"
Yeah.
Because that's what happened to me. I took
Yeah.
a DNA test. It came back 99% Northern European. And I said, "You're probably right."
You're probably right.
Yeah, that's probably accurate.
Yeah, I did one of those, and I'm just a little bit of everything, I think. Of course, there was a lot of German, Irish in there, and very little diversity outside
Mhm.
of people that hail from Caucasus.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
But so it got to a certain point where when the Department of Education is flying the flag of Christian nationalists, I realized that I can't just let it be water under the bridge any longer.
right.
And if anybody would leave their faith because they realize Genesis is completely fiction, or Exodus is fiction, or the
Well, yeah,
exile is an imaginary event that never really happened.
Moses is a conglomeration. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
that's all he is. There was no Moses, you
yeah.
know?
And so if the origin of all reality, so God created plants before he created the sun.
Yes,
Okay, well, that's obviously not true. The sun being the largest thing we all orbit, you know.
yes.
So obviously, the creation of existence, they got
The
that
moon
wrong.
doesn't emit light. The moon
No,
doesn't emit light.
no. And so you've got the creation of existence is wrong. Mankind, Adam and Eve, our DNA prove that one mating pair is not responsible for human genetic diversity. And so the biblical Adam and Eve is genetically disproven. And so the origin of mankind is fake. And then you
Hmm.
have Abraham, the origin of the chosen people. That's fake.
Hmm.
Moses, the origin of the covenant with Yahweh. That's fake. The conquest narrative of Joshua is fake.
Yes,
It's just a ripoff of the Neo Assyrian conquest narratives.
yes.
And so it's like, how many central pivotal characters are we going to have to go through before you go, Jesus probably is irrelevant?
Yeah, Jesus probably never existed.
And they can't take your rights away for something that everyone knows is fake.
That's right.
So we have a job to do.
Yeah. It absolutely is flabbergasting to sit and listen to people. And right now we're dealing with we deal with a lot of issues in regards to Israel. Israel is a nation.
Mhm.
And old Ted Cruz said the quiet part out loud by saying that, well, it says in the Bible you're supposed to
Yeah.
protect Israel.
And Tucker Carlson's like, yeah, where? And he
Where?
goes, well, I don't know,
Where?
but it's somewhere in
It's
between
in
those
there.
two covers.
It's in there somewhere. And what really blows my mind, I got into an argument at the gym the other day with an elderly gentleman. And look, I didn't provoke this guy. I've just got a face that says fuck with me.
Yeah.
Apparently. No, he comes up and he wants to talk politics. I look like I'm MAGA. I do. I
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
People look at me and they assume that I'm a huge supporter of Donald Trump or whatever until I talk. Anyway, he comes over and he's talking about something to deal with Palestine and the Gaza Strip and all that. And I was like, yeah, Israel's just murdering people. They're starving children to death, and you guys are clapping it on. And I said, yeah, it's ignorant. And he was like, well, we've got to protect Israel. I was like, why? And he said, because it's in the Bible. And I said, let me ask you something. I said, how well do you know the Bible? Do you know the covenant? Do you know about the covenant that God had with Israel? The children of Israel wanted a king, and God said, you don't need a king. And they begged for a king. And he said, fine, you can have a king, but I get a prophet. And I said, tell me, name me Bibi Netanyahu's fucking prophet, and I'll tell you that that's God's covenant, that's Israel, that's Israel's.
Yeah.
And he was like, well, I don't think Bibi Netanyahu has a prophet. And I said, then
Then he's not the rightful king.
he's not the rightful king. So yeah, I
Yeah.
used your Bible to disprove it. And then, you can also go into we talked about, you were talking about the genetic testing disproving that Adam and Eve came together. How about just going through the Bible and reading Genesis 1 1 all the way up through 1 and 6? Genesis 6 was my first big question into, is the Bible really real? When it talks about Genesis 6, the sons of God looked down upon the daughters of man, found them fair, took them as wives,
Mhm.
whatever, and all that, where we get the Nephilim from and all that. But outside of that, when he cast, uh, Cain out of the garden, Cain immediately went and got married. Where'd
Yeah.
that shit come from? You
Well,
know?
and before he gets banished, he does say, "But what if I'm killed by the people out there?"
Yes.
It's like, "But Cain, there are no people out there. You're the first descendant of the first couple.
You're three. You're number three now.
What do,
It's like,
what do you mean, buddy?"
yeah. So I mean, it's It's obvious that these things are stories that were passed down, oral
Mhm.
traditions that were passed down, just like the Iroquois creation story, where we're all riding on a huge turtle's shell, you know?
Yeah.
It's the same premise. It makes just as much sense, you know?
Yeah. Well, and the Golden Bough, that this book goes through that a lot. It talks about all the way religion manifested in primitive ways in ancient
Yes.
primitive lands, and how they had, they would summon the wind, they would summon the rain, they would summon fertility, they would plant smaller vegetation underneath big trees because they thought the tree was the king of vegetation and it would protect them. you know and so we see that just change over time, where originally everyone had their own god, and those gods had jurisdiction, or they had
Mm-hmm.
family or tribal ties, and then they stopped worshiping gods and started worshiping kings and only had one god, and then they
Yes.
worshiped angels. Everyone had their own angel, but they were worshiping one god, and then everyone started worshiping their own saints. They all had
Yes.
saints, and then everyone started worshiping their own denomination,
Yes.
because that's what differentiated you. It wasn't St. Vincent or St. Michael or whatever. Now it was, I'm a Presbyterian, I'm a Methodist, I'm a
Yes.
whatever. And now it's changed again. Now they worship themselves. It's just delusional self worship, is all it is.
Yes. Thoughts and prayers.
They don't even know the history of their own denominations. They don't know what the essence of Christianity is they're trying to get from a Calvinist tradition or a Lutheran tradition. They completely ignore when Christianity was totally universal.
The issue is, and I'm looking for somebody, I'm going to send you a creator here, and I want to give her a shout out on here. I just always forget her name on here, but her education was anthropology and theology. So she kind of melded the two together, which was great. And she did it was like a 9-part series on TikTok when she first launched her TikTok. And I sat and watched the whole thing because it was amazing. Everything that you just spoke about, the lineage of religion and how it went from multiple gods, like the king of the plants was the tree, and all that. And then as they found their king, their ruler, conquering tribes ended up only using one. They turned into monotheistic religions,
Mhm.
whereas a lot of your more hunter gatherer type religions stay with a pantheon.
Well,
And
and who do you want to face your enemy with? Do you want to face your enemy with the god of your grandfather, or do you want to face it with your war god?
war god.
When the enemy
Absolutely.
comes to your door, you don't bring the god of your family's tribe like El
Right.
or Asherah.
Right.
You want Yahweh, the lava spitting lightning giant,
Absolutely. Yeah.
to come help you
Absolutely.
out. And so, and that's how. And then if your war god has a fortress and all of your family gods have really cozy cushions and fountains, those guys
Yes.
are probably going to get steamrolled, and the only one that's going
Yes.
to be left is the war guy.
Right. No, I mean, it maths. No nonsense spirituality is her name. And that's her handle on TikTok.
Yeah, I follow her. Yeah, I think
Oh, you know
she's
who I'm talking about. Yeah,
yeah.
her content is really great. I really like it.
Well, and it's
She
important that we reach the women,
at
because guys
100%.
like big hairy white guys, we're going to have limited success.
Oh, absolutely.
And so creators like that, I can't remember her real name, and there's another one named Rachel Kane.
Yeah, I know Rachel Kane. Yes.
Yeah, I use her stuff all the time. Where I think it's super important that it if we have you are you familiar with Lysistrata?
No, I don't believe so. I don't believe
If
so.
famous, I can send it. Lysistrata. It's an ancient Greek story, but about
Okay.
about women just taking charge and handling
Yes, I
business.
know what you're talking about now. Yes, I do. I thought you were talking about somebody's name, and I was like,
Oh
I was
no,
thinking
no,
Liza
yeah,
Minnelli, and I was like, no,
yeah.
yeah,
Well, although she would be helpful.
she would.
No, I think it's super. It's gonna be women that are gonna be the instrumental driving force behind this, because the venom and the disgust that I see when people like Caroline Levitt get up there and start talking, or
Yes,
Sarah Huckabee Sanders
that's
gets
my
up there.
governor, and
Yeah,
I can't stand her. Yeah,
yeah. When they get up there, there's such a visceral, disgusted response from the women in my life that I feel like if we don't leverage the feminine perspective, we're probably going to get the same thing we've always got,
Right.
where bad times create weak men create bad times, and bad times create hard men, and then those hard men create good times.
Right.
We've got to get the feminine perspective in here and have it, like that one idiom that said, hasn't every world war been started by a man?
Yeah.
I was like, yeah,
I
it
mean,
is.
yeah, it is. I mean, well, here's my thing in regards to that. The patriarchy is so deeply ingrained into our nation from the founding fathers all the way up. I mean, women couldn't vote. Women didn't have any power. They couldn't own land, let alone a woman of color, you know. And to be quite honest with you, it should be a lot easier to get women on board. It should
Yeah.
be a lot easier to get women and I'm talking about educated women who understand it. Look, these aren't the same times. These aren't 250 years ago where a
Yeah.
woman needed a big, strong, hairy man to get out there and go kill something so that she could prepare it in the home. That's
Yeah.
not the way the society works. Women are bringing home just as much money as men. Women are just as educated, if not more. Right now, educational levels, women are exceeding men in those. So, but the issue remains that, we've had, and look, I didn't vote for Hillary just because I'm from Arkansas and I'm not a Hillary Clinton fan, but I've never voted for Trump. I want to say that. First and foremost, I've never voted for him. I declared myself as an independent back in 2015 when the DNC decided that they would just put in whoever they wanted to and we would be fine with that. And I've really kind of stepped away from the party politics of it. However, that American exceptionalism that comes out every time a woman runs for an office of power, that whole old worn out trope of, well, do you really think those Muslim countries are going to deal with a woman? You're goddamn right they're going to deal with her.
Yeah.
She's the
Well, when
president of the United States.
she's got 500 or 5,000 nuclear warheads, they're
Yeah,
going to listen when she talks.
100%.
Yeah.
Their religious practices are going to go right out the fucking window because
Yeah.
that's the president of the United States. They talk, we need to listen, So, yeah, we need more women to get involved. We need more women as far as, and I hate to get into politics, but I always end up do. But politics affects everything, every part of our
Yeah.
life, every aspect of it has been involved in some type of politics. So if you're not participating, I said this in a live stream with a couple of political candidates the other day, and it was so inappropriate. They couldn't help but laugh their ass off. I said, listen, guys, politics is like Bill Cosby. Either we fucking or I'm fucking,
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the way politics is, though, because
Yeah. Well,
there's
in my
no way of
initial,
getting around it.
I had identity shattering events happen in combat.
Hmm.
Right. And so I wanted to deeply understand combat because I thought combat had happened to me. I
Right.
didn't know that I was a member, I viewed it from the opposite perspective. And so I tried to study combat and I found myself coming back to politics every time. And you can never study combat and resolve your combat trauma without learning something about socioeconomic politics because they always
Yes,
lead to combat.
they do.
And then when you boil it down every time, the keystone at the middle is religion. Every time the keystone is religion. And so I figure if guys like you, guys like Dan McClellan, guys like Trust But Verify, No Nonsense
Yes.
Spirituality, Rachel Kane, Just in the Deconstruction Zone, Ezzo, Ian Debates,
Yeah. Ian.
Joel Reads the Bible, and there's many more that I can't remember offhand. But as long as we're all rowing in the same direction, we don't have to fight each other. That's why, I'll get
Right.
people notify me and be like, "Hey, your video got stitched by this other atheist." Great.
Fantastic. Good. Get
Yeah.
that word out there. Yes.
Hey, I'm not going to shit on that creator at all. What I
No.
might do is stoke the fire and make it look interesting if I think that'll generate some buzz. But otherwise, I don't care because
Yeah.
my mission is to delegitimize Christianity so it stops ruining the United States of America. That's my
Absolutely.
only
Yeah.
mission. And at any point in time, I'd like to add this caveat. At any point in time, God can show up. Okay.
100%.
He's allowed to show up any point in time and give me irrefutable evidence because you know how well I know the Bible. I would be a weapon for
Yes.
Christianity if he would just
Yes.
show up, answer one prayer,
Yes.
just prove one thing to me beyond a shadow of a doubt, and you've got one of the greatest. I'll bring 10,000 souls to Christ in my first week.
Yes. 100%. Well, that's the other thing too. We talked about the different flavors of Christianity, and we talked about the different religions and everything. If there was only one God, if there was truly one God, everybody's Bible would look pretty much the same.
Mhm.
Everybody's religion would resemble each other so closely that you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. And if you
Or
truly,
the right Bible would be fireproof or waterproof,
absolutely,
or
absolutely,
it would auto translate to the exact dialect that the reader could understand. There would
yes,
be something, because in my opinion, religiosity is the belief that a natural occurrence can have an unnatural explanation.
yes,
To
yeah,
me, that's what religiosity is, believing that a natural occurrence can have a supernatural explanation. And if you're not natural, you're unnatural. Supernatural is unnatural.
it is. Absolutely, it's unnatural.
And from what I can tell, a natural explanation is always going to be more likely than a supernatural or an unnatural one.
Yes. It's like the Exodus. You know, we talk about the plagues.
Hmm.
We can explain those. If those were really to happen, we would have a scientific explanation to explain those. The
Oh yeah,
problem, the problem is that as science excludes and disproves certain aspects of spirituality, the goalposts move.
hmm,
The religion has to shift. You
yeah.
know,
God shrinks.
God shrinks. He does. And if your God's such a powerful God, why do you have to put the Ten Commandments up in classrooms so little boys and girls can be indoctrinated with your religion instead of, we don't put writings from the Mahabharata up there. We're
Yeah.
not, you don't see any other culture in this country trying to put their religious doctrines up there that's already a very heavily indoctrinated society to begin with.
Yeah, and one of the things that I read to my children was the story of Moses coming down the mountain with the tablets of the Ten Commandments and then shattering them before anyone could read them.
Yeah. We
And
got,
I read that to my kids. And I said, this is the story in the Bible.
yeah,
How did your teacher learn the Ten Commandments that Moses destroyed?
that's right.
And well, they must have come up with a second set of tablets then.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah.
must have been that.
Well, luckily I got these two in my robe pockets.
I got these smaller ones in my sandal. Yeah. And there's 1050 commandments in the Bible.
Yes,
And they picked 10.
yes. And not even good ones.
Yeah,
I
half
mean,
of them are junk.
yeah, they are. Half of them deal with fucking jealousy, dude. I mean,
Yeah. And it's like if God created everybody, then he used DNA to do it.
yes.
And if God explained DNA in the Bible 4,000 years ago, why, that would be remarkable. That would be some substantial evidence. If he explained microbes, bacteria, viruses, germ theory, there could have been at any point in time anything that we needed a telescope or a microscope for. God could have handled that
He could have. Hey,
pretty easy.
this is amoebic dysentery, okay? I created this, but it's going to make you shit yourself to death.
Yeah.
But to think about those things, though, like what would be solid proof that there was a God? How about a prophecy that actually prevented something? How about a
Mhm.
prophecy that would actually help further humanity instead of pull it back? I look at people who, we had this big rapture event this last spring, early summer, and oh my God, Darby is still coming back, and still the hits just keep on coming.
He'd probably be pleased to know that.
Oh, 100% he would be. Yes.
Yeah. He'd
Uh,
probably be tickled pink.
what was that? John Nelson Darby? Isn't he the guy
Yeah.
that did yeah. And now he wasn't the one that originated it. It was, there was actually a lady
Yeah, the
that,
Seventh day Adventist.
yeah, it was the Seventh Day Adventist that did that. And then, but he's the one that nationalized it. He's the one that had
Yeah.
people actually living up on their rooftops waiting to
Well, I
be,
think he invested the most in disseminating the message,
yes.
and he got a pretty good return on his investment, I will
Oh, he
say.
did. He did. He did. We're still talking about him. That was
Well,
what,
I read those Left Behind books, the Left Behind series.
yes. Yes.
Those I was convinced that was in the Bible. The rapture was in the Bible
Oh, dude, yeah.
when I
No,
was a kid.
it never made sense to me when people would talk about the rapture, just like the Trinity. The Trinity never made sense to me. I was like, so basically, God says in the Ten Commandments, "Thou shalt have no other god before me," but you're praying to Jesus
And Mary.
and Mary. Yes, There's not a lot of
Hmm.
Catholics where I'm from, but it's all Protestant, but yeah, you're praying to Jesus and Mary for your, forgiveness, for your, blessings, whatever.
Yeah, as an intermediary.
As an intermediary, i.e., a demigod.
Yeah.
Jesus is a demigod. He's no different from, Hercules and some of the other legends, that are out
I,
there.
I think I think Jesus is a masterful character because anytime you can take two archetypes and build a character out of them to where it's directly in the middle, they have no competition and they skyrocket to the top.
That's true.
So when you
That's
look
true.
at Spider-Man, right? Why
Yeah.
was Spider-Man such a success? It's because he was a teenager.
Yes.
Every other superhero was a grown man.
Yes.
Here's this kid's a teenager and he's whipping ass.
Yes.
Yeah, and he was the first superhero to lose.
Yeah.
He gets beaten by Dr. Octopus, who was a German scientist.
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
they've got this great character, Batman, Bill Finger and Bob Kane, they create this
Bob
Batman
Kane. Yeah.
guy, and
Yes.
they base him off of the Shadow, the Spider, the Phantom, and Sherlock Holmes.
Yes.
They're like, what if Sherlock Holmes was also a real hard ass? They're
Yes.
like, we're gonna make that guy. And then you got Stan Lee who creates Spider-Man and goes, what if he was a kid, not a sidekick? And what if he lost? And what if he wasn't black and dark colors? What if he's a bright, vibrant red? And what if he behaved like Tarzan? Let's say he fights like Tarzan. So now you've got a new archetype that just
Yes.
flies straight through. And that's happened multiple times in Spider-Man's lineage.
Yes, it has.
And same with Pinocchio. I
Yeah.
mean, I've I wonder what I've done with it, but I've got three. I've got three. So I've got a bunch of bookcases out there. So like, there's
Right.
a woman named Fran Lebowitz, I think her name is. She said there's two types of people in the world: people that have books and people that have enough room for books, and they're never the same person.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We
That's
live
me.
in a tiny house and we've got books
Yeah,
everywhere. So, yeah.
yeah. And so when you look at Pinocchio, right? It's the same author from Italian, and I have
Hmm.
three different copies of it, and none of them are identical.
What?
Yeah, they're not identical. They tell the same story, but the words aren't the same. And it doesn't say it's not by Carlo Collodi. It says it
Right.
is by him, but they don't match.
How? I mean, like, is it just different publishing companies? Is that what it is? Or,
Well, I
like,
just think it's a different grasp on taking the Italian and trying to make it rhyme in English. And so you have to alter some of the words a little to
right,
get the same sort of rhyme and
right.
like fairy tale feel. But the reality is it says one author. It doesn't say multiple authors. It says he wrote it and three different versions, none of them match. And he's way more modern than the Bible.
So you mean to tell me that when we find these clay jars that have tablets in them that are, a couple thousand, 2, 3 thousand years old in basically a dead language, a language people don't really speak anymore, and we
Yeah.
translate them, there is an opportunity to get a mistranslation?
Believe it or not, yeah. And
Yeah, it
and what's
seems
crazy
far
too
fetched to me.
is
Yes.
the documents in history that you keep,
Hmm.
they're the important ones. The ones you throw out are the junk ones you don't really care about. That's all
Right.
the stuff we have found archaeologically has been the stuff that they buried in a dump because they didn't
Yeah,
care. And so all of the real good stuff we've never even found.
that's true. I didn't even think about that, but you're absolutely right on that. That's not.
We have
We're not.
so many receipts. We've got tax receipts and stuff
Mhm.
like that we've because think of how many receipts we have. I print more receipts in my day-to-day life than I do anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we talk about that record keeping. Record keeping is crucial. We talk about the record of Jesus Christ, and we talk about Pontius Pilate, and we talk about Barabbas, and this tale that was spun to talk about the crucifixion. If there was one thing that the Roman Empire was, it was litigious. They would write every single thing down,
They were big
every time.
writers. Yeah.
They were good at record keeping because you have such a huge empire that its tentacles spread so far. You have to
Mm.
be meticulous with your bookkeeping. If you
Yeah. Well,
killed
not
a
only that,
political, if you killed a political protester that, three in one day, whatever, there would be a record of that. I'm sure there are records of people that were being executed.
Well, they did say that during the siege of Jerusalem, that there were 6,000 people crucified in one day.
Yeah.
And so, if 1 in 10 men were named Jesus, well, I mean, they've, how many? 600 Jesuses just got crucified?
Yeah. It's
You know,
true.
and so to say, like, and I don't know if you saw my latest video where I was doing the speed tab, just trying to tab the Bible. It was a Precious Moments Bible. It's all pink with like little
Oh,
lambs all
no, I
over it.
hadn't seen it yet, but I will check that out. Yes,
Yeah, I got
absolutely.
it for free. I go to antique stores and like thrift stores and stuff, and I ask if they have any Bibles. And then I'll get up to the counter and I go, "Can I have this for free?" And you'd be shocked at how many times they say yes.
I'll be dadgum. Well, yeah, they're doing the Lord's work. Well,
Yeah,
there's nothing wrong. I mean, it's
and
the
I
most
thank them
published
for it.
book in history. You know, it's the most published book in history in many forms. I absolutely love the fact that you brought in the Pinocchio reference
Mhm.
because that does illustrate so deeply how different translations happen.
And that's just
The
one
same author.
order of magnitude. That's from like modern Italian to modern
Or in
English,
English.
and
We're
it does
talking
not
about
match.
we're talking about going from, what do we say? Probably Aramaic. Is that what they spoke back then? Would be some
Yeah,
sort of
it could have been Attic Greek. It could have been
right.
Koine Greek. It could have been Aramaic. It could
Yeah.
have been, I mean, but in the Gospel of Mark, you know, the famous line where a camel will not pass through the eye of a needle. Well, the
Yes.
term kamalos, camel, it's probably gamala, the Aramaic word for rope.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah.
there's
Makes
some,
more sense, doesn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
there's some Aramaic hints in the Gospel of Mark that are
Yeah.
suggestive that, you know, it might have had some Aramaic sourcing, or the author of Mark was at least aware that somebody from Galilee would have been an Aramaic speaker, and he included the Jesus's final words in Aramaic, and a couple of
Right.
his quotes have Aramaic hints. But outside of that, and Aramaic changed so drastically too, you know, if, even a modern Arabic speaker would not be able to
No.
decipher Aramaic. And
So
so,
it,
yeah.
sorry, no one trying to interrupt you, but we talk about languages. I took so I was an English major in college, and one of my upper level courses was the history of the English language. We called it Hell, but it was one of the
Nice.
most interesting courses I've ever seen, is because you're dealing with English in a way that it's a foreign language.
Yeah.
When you start talking about Old English, like real, true Old English, the English we speak today is,
It's the PlayStation 5
it is. And you're
compared to the
also,
Atari.
so there for a long time, it was Old Norse and Old English were right on top of each other. They lived in the same villages and stuff. And some people spoke Old English, some people spoke Old Norse. And then they call that a Creole when two languages kind of meld together. Anyway, our the PhD that was teaching that course was also a linguist, and she was married to another linguist PhD who also taught at that university, and they had an 8-year-old daughter. And their 8-year-old daughter came in and read an excerpt from Beowulf in Old Norse.
Oh,
8 years
wow.
old, read it in Old Norse, and then jumped to Chaucer's Canterbury Tales in Old English
That's incredible.
and read an excerpt from that. I didn't recognize a single word, not a
Yeah.
single word in that. And she's
Yeah.
8 years old, one. And two, I want to know what she's doing these days. What kind of brain farming is she doing somewhere? Because it's an incredible amount of intellect at 8 years old.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But when I found out that we don't even have original manuscripts of Shakespeare,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
and the different manuscripts we have of Shakespeare don't match,
No, they don't. They don't.
and they have different episodes. You know, some are omitting episodes,
Yes,
and that's only in one language. Now,
yes,
can you imagine? Now, the Romans realized that if you just conquer enough people, you will absorb enough talent.
yes.
And they commissioned rewrites of famous myths. The Roman government deliberately commissioned a rewrite of a famous myth so it would support Roman ideals instead of Macedonian or, you know, whatever.
What myth was it?
Well, the Homeric myths were rewritten by Virgil
Yeah, they were Virgil. Yeah,
deliberately.
yes.
And so we have evidence of the government who otherwise were masters of propaganda, and they viewed
Mhm.
propaganda as just another arm of military conquest.
Yes.
to get in there and pacify the population by any means necessary so you don't have to commit your legions to the fight. And the greatest way that you could convince, because these Jews fought, the Judeans fought nonstop. I mean, they fought against Sennacherib,
Hmm.
Necho, Nebuchadnezzar. They fight constantly. These people were
Yes.
always fighting. Adrian, Trajan in the Kitos War, obviously Titus.
Yeah.
And so they were fighting nonstop, but they were never winning. And so if you actually worshiped a real war god, you would have thought they would have had more battlefield success than they actually
Yeah.
did have. But the greatest way to pacify these people, Nebuchadnezzar recognized it by exiling the religious elites,
Hmm.
by taking, because they thought Yahweh had jurisdiction over Jerusalem. And if they deported them, they no
Yeah.
longer have access to his influence. And so, as our views of gods changed, of course, they had to change tactics. And so they destroyed the temple. They're like, there, that settles
Done.
that. But it didn't, because they just kept being insurgents. But yeah, I mean, you would have thought that the Judahites would have had more battlefield success
Right.
worshiping a real war god, but they didn't have it. And so
Wasn't
the real,
Baal wasn't Baal the war god of the Canaanites?
yeah, yeah, as far Baal Hadad,
Baal
as far as
Hadad, yeah.
I know. But it would not be outrageous to suggest that the Romans identified the source of the social disturbance as
Hmm.
being these people's religious tradition.
Yeah.
And realizing that if they rewrote their origin story, or they at least co opted it and took it from them, then they would at least split their enemy. They
Yes.
could they could split their enemy and reduce their authority and reduce their power. And of course, that's what happened. You have the
Yes.
Zealots separate from the Sicarii, separate from the Essenes and the Sadducees, and everybody splits. And the Romans had the exact result that they, whether they intended to do it or not, because I know a lot of biblical mythicists think the entire thing's a big grand scheme, but I think people are far too stupid for that and far
Yeah.
too mundane and average. I think what happened was a bunch of gullible people got duped.
Yeah. And just kept passing that shit on. I mean, well, you talk about the grand scheme and people, which brings me back to education, though. We talk about the destruction of the Department of Education, which, look, I'm not saying that the Department of Education is winning any prizes. It's transparent that in the United States we chose the military industrial complex over everything else. When you look at some of the issues we face in regards to China. China focused their attention, their money, their power onto advancement of technology and education of their people. Not necessarily that but they're leaps and bounds ahead of us. And if you look at other
Well,
nations,
they don't build data centers in the middle of the desert.
yeah,
That's something they don't do.
you need a little bit of water around those
Yeah,
data
and
centers. It would be
and some
helpful.
cool. You need some cool temperatures.
Yeah,
And their
yeah,
manufacturing base, if you do business with any big manufacturer in China, all of their manufacturing is located in pockets.
yes,
Like if you wanted to get a Whirlpool, Kenmore, a GE, any washing machine, it comes
yeah,
out of one factory. The chassis
yes.
is all made in one factory. The motors are all made in one factory, and they all get on the same barge and come over here.
And we slap a different sticker on them.
Oh yeah, and then we act, because I do a lot of appliance repair, and a lot of appliances are repaired with just $5 pumps,
Yeah,
a $4 hose and hose
yeah,
clamps or
yeah,
something,
yeah.
and it doesn't matter what brand it is. It's the same hose. It's the same little pump. It's the same motor. It's the same whatever. And they just do things like they wouldn't. They are orchestrating the way business moves, and we are just accommodating the way business is moving.
We are the consumer. That's all we
Yeah.
are, is the consumer. The days of America being the leader in manufacturing and things like that. Now, look, I'm a maintenance man in a manufacturing facility. I get it. We
Mhm.
need manufacturing facilities to keep people working. We need people to
Oh
be
yeah.
able to have a job to sustain, but to what end? So that they can buy more shit, so that they can buy
But
more things.
we could do things in a deliberately strategic way and see more success.
Oh, absolutely, we could. I agree with
And I
that
think that should be the
100%.
goal.
I do
I think
too.
we shouldn't waste energy. If we're gonna do it, we should do it completely to the best of our ability and know when we're done. And when we're done, we're done. and
Yeah,
move to the next task.
absolutely. But we don't do that. My wife and I watched a documentary here a while back, and it was talking about the amount of waste that consumerism has created in clothes. I remember when Tom's, the shoes came out, everybody was so excited because if you bought a pair of Tom's, they would donate a pair to a kid in Kenya or something.
Mhm.
I mean, but it turned out to be an environmental disaster. You know,
Yeah,
we have way too much. We live in a world full of excess.
yeah.
You're talking about repairing appliances. The vast majority of Americans will just haul it off to the dump and not have it
That's where I
repaired.
make, yeah, that's where I make a lot of my money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah. So, I mean, we live in a throwaway society and a throwaway culture to where we don't fix things anymore.
Yeah. But then, and if you look at like an old vacuum cleaner or something, they were engineered in such a robust way
Hmm.
that if it did break, you had to be a full-blown machinist to be able
Yeah,
to repair it.
it's true.
And engineering is hard to come by. And so I feel like it was the natural line of drift to make it easier on the repairman and on the consumer to just be like, we're not going to engineer these chain drives or these belt drives,
Right, right.
like we're just
Yeah,
going to do it real simple.
yeah.
And
No, and I agree. And there are some things that are. You just gotta what happens when you're through with them? Where does it
yeah,
go? How is it recycled? Look at the component parts that are involved in it. And I'm talking about, from your small servo motors all the way up to, your big battery powered, everything's going into the direction of rechargeable batteries. Well,
mhm.
those rechargeable batteries eventually die. And it's just the truth of it. What toxic chemicals are we releasing back into this planet because of all that?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy to me. But I can't remember what was the
Sorry, I
other.
sidebarred you there so
No, no,
hard. I did. Yeah, yeah.
all I do is sidebar. That's all
Okay,
I
yeah.
do
That's good.
because I'll go on these crazy tangents. But that's because everything ties into itself.
It
So, you
does.
can't really talk economics without talking combat because if you go, well, why is the United States so many trillions of dollars in debt? Well, because we financed wars on credit.
Yeah, yeah. That's what we
One of the
do.
most foolish plans ever. We got away from the gold standard and moved to the brass standard.
Thank you. Yeah,
We
we
could start
did.
throwing
We
bullets
did.
at them.
Yeah, that's it.
And so, we're just in a pickle that we don't have to be in, and we should fight our way out instead of continuing to dig. And the shovel that's digging us to our grave is Christianity.
It is 100%. It is. It ties into so much in our culture and in our nation. It
Hmm.
absolutely does. Because I mean, God, even standing up and saying the Pledge of Allegiance at a ball game gives me the ick.
Same, same.
I'm just
And
like,
I walked into my kids' school and I tell the administrators, I go, the Pledge of Allegiance is not a real pledge
yeah,
because it's not notarized. There's no legal authority, and it's administered like an oath,
it
but it's not a
is.
real oath. And so all it is a political ritual that children must perform correctly or there is negative consequences. So you're saying there will be negative consequences for not participating in a political ritual. And the teachers always tell me, but it's not required. And the law makes no distinction between whether they're forced, threatened, or coerced.
Hmm.
And if I asked my kids, what would happen if you didn't do the pledge? They were like, they would tell me to stand up.
Yeah.
That sounds like coercion to me.
Well, and the thing is, you're looking at also being ostracized too. And you're talking about a
Mhm.
very impressionable young person. It's
That's
almost
right.
like the development of the Hitler Youth back in the late 20s, or early 30s. It is so heavily ingrained. If you look at some of the pamphlets from the Hitler Youth during Nazi Germany, and then look at some of this, I call it the Circle Kirk, but the Charlie Kirk bullshit, this
Yeah.
Turning Point USA, which is just another form of Christian nationalism trying to slip into the system. They're
Yeah.
doing it. You've got Governor Abbott in Texas who's wanting to mandate, was it Turning Point Club or whatever,
In every school.
in every
Meanwhile,
school.
meanwhile, he's a devout Bible believing Christian who's in a wheelchair.
Yes. How do
He's a
them
devout,
prayers
so
work?
he believes, he swears on, he swears
Yeah. Yeah.
that he
Yeah. He
believes the
swears.
Bible is true, and that he believes in the healing power of Christ while being wheelchair bound. Are you familiar with the story of Lucian of Samosata and the passing of Peregrinus?
No,
It's a
I don't
great
think so.
story.
Let's
Yeah,
hear it.
so there's a man named Peregrinus. And in my opinion, and this isn't just my opinion,
Okay.
okay? I think Proteus Peregrinus is Saint Ignatius, the famous Christian Saint
Yeah.
Ignatius. I
Yeah.
think he is Peregrinus Proteus. And Lucian of Samosata tells the story of this great con man who heard about this community of willingly poor Christians. And he sashayed on in and said God told him that they would be there, and they believed it hook, line, and sinker. And then he wrote a whole bunch of letters for them and rewrote a bunch of their gospels. And all of the parts in Paul's epistles that talk about prison, all of his prison narratives,
Yeah.
sound exactly like Ignatius. And Ignatius sounds exactly like Peregrinus.
Wow.
And so I wouldn't be surprised. Now, Lucian was a satirist, so he could
Right.
have been satirizing. But, if they want to cite Josephus, I'll cite
Josephus.
Josephus. Yeah, if they want to cite Justin Martyr, or if they want to cite Celsus, or if they want to cite Justin Martyr or Tertullian, I'll cite Celsus or Porphyry.
Right. The influence of Paul in and of itself, and I'm glad you brought this up, onto modern day, onto Christianity in general. I often thought growing up, the church isn't anything like the Bible. Nothing is
Mm-mm.
biblical in the church. Nothing about the church is biblical. You have a
Yeah.
pastor, you have, but what it is closely resembles, is just a type of any type of pagan worship. You would have the high priest, and then you would have the lower priest coming up. That those are the
You got to read
deacons.
this book. I left them in my van. Okay, it's by
Okay.
H.C. Hillman, and it's Original Sin. Yeah, it's a doozy, and it's a painful read. Yeah, talking about Paul. So if you look at the criteria for diagnosing somebody with schizotypal personality disorder, it's a preoccupation with the paranormal or the supernatural.
Mm-hmm.
It's superstitious, or it's a paranoid or suspicious thinking.
Mm-hmm.
It's believing mundane occurrences have supernatural or special significance. It is often having hallucinations of bright lights or feeling presence of somebody who isn't there,
Yeah.
and not maintaining a robust social network outside of first degree kinship. So you can maintain first degree kinship but just about nothing else.
Oh, goodness.
That is Paul of
That is
Tarsus.
Paul of Tarsus. Yeah.
That is the Apostle Paul. And if anybody today was diagnosable schizotypal personality disorder, we would not take their deeply held beliefs seriously. So
No,
I
we
don't
wouldn't.
know why we would go back in time 2,000 years and take it seriously, because the human brain hasn't changed enough for me to be convinced that diagnosis didn't exist then.
Yeah.
If it existed then we should ridicule it exactly the same. But in a culture where that sort of schizotypal behavior is rewarded, you would expect to see more of it. In a culture like ours, where schizotypal behavior is ostracized, you see far less.
Yes, absolutely. Well,
And so the motivation for a group of church elders to come together initially could have very well just been mental illness, and they felt more accepted amongst each other than they did the larger society.
wow. I didn't even think about that, but you're right. I mean, well, if you look at the writings of Paul, his letters to the Corinthians, and a lot of
Galatians.
Galatians, yes, thank you. But those letters, those founded the church today. People take
Mhm.
more, it seems like Christians take more as to what Paul said. And we're
Mhm.
not even talking about a guy that walked with Jesus. If you listen to
Yeah.
Paul's accounts of how he became a Christian, he was terrorizing Christians. And then he saw his bright light, and then all of a sudden now he has a kinship with Jesus. And so he's going to spread the word. He writes that shit like Jesus is talking to him right there. And I have known people who have had mental illness where they believe that the voice of God was speaking in their head. They are prone to do bad things when that happens, when they're having those manic episodes like that. But too many people rely on Paul and not the words of Christ himself. And look, I get it. I know the history of the Bible. I know that the author, the closest author of any of the Gospels was what, maybe 60 years? Are we talking about?
Yeah, potentially, but could have been even later. I think it's much closer to the time of Marcion and the time Marcion of Sinope,
Yeah.
and I think because I don't understand why the Bible or why the gospel narrative needed 60 years to explode. Like
Yeah.
it could have been written in 139 and been super popular by 140.
Yeah.
You
It
know,
could have.
it could have taken 9 months. We don't know. I don't know. Now, sure, that would have been uncommon or remarkable, but I mean, look at the outcome. The outcome was remarkable.
It's an incredible outcome.
And so to me, it's not unreasonable to think that these would have caught fire. The popularity would have caught fire quickly and spread
Yes.
quickly.
Well, not only that, what gets me about so look, we don't know specifically who wrote the Gospels. We don't. We do know that the same guy that wrote Matthew probably wrote, no, the same guy that wrote Mark most likely wrote Luke, I think. I think those two Gospels are believed to have
Luke
been
and Acts.
Luke and Acts. Okay, my bad.
Luke and Acts have the same author because they're
Okay,
both addressed in
yeah.
the beginning to Theophilus.
Okay, I got you. I got you. But hell, two books in the Bible in the Gospels talk about the Immaculate Conception. In a debate class in college, I was asked to choose a topic, explosive topic, something that was taboo to talk about, and so I did the divinity of Christ, and I went through. Certain occurrences that happened during that time frame. I went through the Edict of Milan, through the Council of Nicaea. I went through some of those steps, and I had people really enraged in that class
Mhm.
because of that. And that was one of my key points. There was in the Gospels, there's only two books that talks about the Immaculate Conception. If Christ was divine, then that would have been in all four of those books. If the Immaculate Conception happened, it wouldn't have so closely resembled ancient legends from, Egypt,
Yeah. Well,
Babylonia. It's like,
it goes back to Richard Carrier's Bayes theorem of reasoning, where you
yeah,
go, what would the evidence look like if that were true? And it's like, well, if Jesus really were divine, then he probably would have had some sort of unnatural beginning.
yes,
Okay, it might not have been a birth. It could have been any sort of unnatural beginning. But if he did have an unnatural beginning and the sperm of Joseph wasn't used to build his DNA, why is Joseph's family line relevant?
exactly, exactly. It's all about
And
the
so
blood. Yeah,
and it just shows you that if God had a hand in writing that, God would have known DNA was a building block of biology. And he would have been like, you don't have to include the Joseph stuff.
they're not going
His
to know.
DNA is
Yeah,
in there, buddy.
yeah,
But that happened. And so it looks like it was written with the wisdom and the knowledge of the people of that time period with no divine assistance whatsoever.
absolutely. And then also they argue that, and that was one of the biggest uproars about the difference between the Gnostics and the Arians. Is the divinity of the Christ, and I believe that the Immaculate Conception was something that was just added post hoc to make it more magical, more believable.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the exact same purpose as having Spider Man be defeated,
Yes,
because it was unexpected in the genre for a
yes,
superhero
absolutely.
to not win. And so they're like, well, we can take this Judaism thing that's like be fruitful and multiply. We do all this fertility stuff. We grant magical babies all the time.
Yes,
And then up here, we don't grant magical babies. Our gods literally copulate with our populace. And
yes,
they go, I know, we'll put them together.
yep,
And
that's
you've
right.
got a new archetype. He's perfectly in between both.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. You're right. Absolutely. He's yeah. I love that, dude. I love that you tied in Superman with Jesus. I
Yeah.
think that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, and I think it did the exact same thing in their psyche.
Oh, I believe it did. And I mean, if you look at just the pagan rituals that happen throughout the course of the year in Christendom, you have the Easter, you have, you know,
Saturnalia.
Saturnalia,
Yeah.
which is we're celebrating Jesus's birthday. Man, it's really weird that we would, do that.
I thought that was Mithras's birthday, but oh well.
Yeah, that's right.
You can,
Yeah,
but
that's right. But hey,
Jesus
I
can have it.
mean, Jesus, Mithras, whoever, doesn't matter.
Well, I mean, it's basically the same guy now because the American army,
Yeah.
Mithras was essentially just the god of the Roman infantry. And so now we've basically got another god of the American army,
Yeah. I
in this
mean,
American Jesus.
we have a Secretary of Defense calling himself the Secretary of War, quoting the Lord's Prayer on a battlefield with showing all of our military might and muster. Tell me
I
they're
wonder
not.
why he wasn't quoting Isaiah 2.
Isaiah 2. You're
Yeah.
better at this than I
Uh,
am. Go ahead.
we should beat all of our swords into plows and wage war no more.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, because there's no money in plows. There's a lot of money in weaponry. A lot
That's
of
right.
money in weaponry because that's what we do. You know, it's amazing when some people call stuff out. I look back at Eisenhower's exit address where he talks about be weary of the military industrial complex. And
Mhm.
it's like everybody just plugged their fingers in their ears, pinned their ears back, and said, fuck it, let's do this. Let's do this.
One thing that I have noticed, though, in my studies is that the warfare always follows the lead edge of technology.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
and it's not far behind. So we had the domestication of horses, and it was not far behind. We had chariots and then
Yes.
empires. And
Yes.
then we've got Dr. Richard Gatling. He invents the machine gun because he wanted to curb men's enthusiasm for war.
Yes.
And now there are 8 machine guns per platoon.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
and same thing, you keep going. We've got a nuclear warhead, but we've only got 2, and we can end the whole world war with it. Well, now we've got 5,000, and one of them's the size of a football,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know. And now the lead edge is we're in an attention economy. So he who can attract the most attention has the most economy,
Yeah.
and drones. And so I believe there will be the next war is going to be on the lead edge of drone and attention gathering technology or attention capturing technology.
AI.
Maybe not AI because I see that as kind of like the bone density scan where they thought it was going to replace the X-ray,
Right.
but the X-ray just didn't need to be replaced. I think this AI thing is just a lame duck that's going to end up creating the next engine or the next motor with the next fuel
Right.
source. And whoever does that's going to usher in the next era of humanity if we don't kill ourselves first. But yeah, I can foresee. Have you read Daniel Immerware's? I think it's How to Hide an Empire,
No.
but it's an excellent book, and he talks about how ammonia was synthesized for the purpose of making fertilizers, and that exact same process made Cyclone B,
Yeah.
the gassing of
Right.
the
Yes.
dock out and all that.
Yeah.
And and so that's the lead edge of chemical technology. They're trying to solve human starvation and create some sort of synthetic fertilizer that ends up being the next weapon.
Yes.
And so I wouldn't be surprised if we come up with some sort of drone denial technology, like a fog, some sort of chemical fog that like
Yeah.
dissolves plastic. And then after the war, we use that exact thing to melt the plastic ocean that's a plastic island that's out in the ocean. And everyone
Right.
goes, remember that ecological disaster we avoided by using that magical plastic eating fog? It's like, don't forget where
We,
that came from. That
we
came from World
developed
War
that
II.
to, yes. Yeah. We developed that to, and
Yeah.
then all the consequences that fall out of that, I believe I'm hopeful that AI will eat itself. And when I
I
say
think
that,
it will.
I'm hopeful that it'll become too burdensome. It'll require too much energy. There's going to be too much, data required. I feel like that's why there's been such a big push over the past 15 years. I feel like our intelligence communities and the technological aspect. So just coming from a position where I worked on stuff that had a classified level, right? I was working on stuff that now is archaic, but at the time was state of the art, brand new
Yeah.
stuff. But I
Oh,
also
yeah.
worked on stuff that I couldn't talk about that was just mind boggling shit. But then everybody knows about it now. That's back then versus now. For years, they've been pushing this. There's no such thing as a net zero carbon emission. Right? That's not going to exist. And that's not even the goal that they're going with. What they're trying to do is implement and get people used to, like, people put LED lights in their house now. An LED puts off way more amps than just a regular light bulb. So why aren't anyone's energy bills going down? Because there's not meant to be. It's meant to save energy, not for us, not to save our bill. It's meant to save energy on the grid. That way we can apply that to where they want that energy gone to, i.e., data centers. That's why there was such a huge push for wind, solar, and turbine. And then also nuclear power. At the end of the Biden administration, he signed a bill to reduce some of the regulations on nuclear testing, not so much for like nuclear weapons, but for nuclear energy. It's so rigid to be able to set up a nuclear substation to where you can generate power out of it. There's not been a lot of exploration in that regards. Well, they opened
Well,
that up to where they could.
if everything in reality is made from an atomic structure, then the way forward in reality has got to be inside some atomic structure.
Absolutely, it does. I agree with that 100%.
And we should be full steam ahead trying to find the next motor, the next engine, the next fuel source, whatever it may be. It might be helium 3. It might be something that burns in the center of a star that we're able to harness. Who knows?
Right.
But I think if we don't put our effort into it, we're never going to find it. We're not going to find it on accident.
Absolutely not. And then one last thing on the AI, though, I want to bring this up. If they were ever to be able to connect artificial intelligence to a quantum computer, that is the only way that I think that they could figure out the cooling needs of. Because look, a quantum computer has to be at sub-zero level, whatever. I can't remember exactly what it is. I think it's like negative 100 Celsius, something like that, in order for it to actually be able to compute. Whereas the AI, the data centers, they have cooling issues. They heat up.
Yeah.
That's the only barrier. Physics is the only barrier right now that I see. And that's why I think that AI is going to eat itself before it reaches any type of a threat type level.
Yeah, I mean, historically, when it comes to like economic things, collapse is always imminent when something doesn't turn a profit.
Yes.
And they've put like $5 billion into it. They've seen, I think it's maybe $1 billion in return,
Yeah.
something like that. And so it's 5 orders of magnitude too expensive, and we're in the billions already.
Yes.
And so I just,
And they're
you
still
know,
throwing money at it. Still
yeah,
throwing
well,
money
because
at
they're
it.
hoping for that one breakthrough,
Yeah.
but they're not motivated by scientific achievement. They're motivated by some sort of personal gain or status that they'll get from discovery.
It's the power issue at this point. That's what that boils down to, in my opinion. I could be wrong. Hey, buddy, I have had a freaking blast talking to you tonight, man. I really
Yeah,
have.
likewise.
And
Likewise.
I would love to do this again if you're up for it. If not,
Yeah,
you can tell me off the air. Don't hurt
yeah.
my feelings on there.
No, but I'm not that important. I can't believe anyone wants to talk to me.
Oh, dude, no, yeah.
I'm just a little guy just trying to do the right thing out here. Certainly.
I do appreciate you. Like I say, I'll be in contact with you. I'd love to do this again.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. Thank you.